I'm David Liggitt with Data Center Hawk, and I am very excited to be joined with Chris Downie. Chris is CEO of Flexential and has been a big contributor, actually, to the DCH podcasts over the years. And so, Chris, as you know, very appreciative of your efforts, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, David. Always great to chat with you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, you bet. You know, it's really been interesting to watch Flexential grow over the last several years for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, just the company's maturity and growth. You know, as enterprise users have had to navigate a pretty challenging world as it relates to what is really left for them, because there's been so much around AI and that growth. Maybe let's start with the enterprise user and just Flexential's approach to make sure that, you know, there is capacity and services available for them in the markets that you're in today and the markets that you're growing in. What's that been like?
Yeah, so the the consumption dynamic, I think for everyone, but definitely for us as well, has changed or is being forced to change. So as you know, we've been focused on a multi-tenancy model where we bring in anywhere from large-scale technology to as-a-service companies to large-scale enterprise, or even medium-scale enterprise, and we offer a flexible product for various different kind of workload sizes, if you will. And so, given the onset of kind of the AI demand set, which is a little over 2 years at this juncture, that began to consume a lot of capacity across the board, as well as shift the attention of, I'll call them, people that traditionally offered a comparable product to us to really focus on building for hyperscale only. And so that's really left a gap in the market, if you will, that has to be filled, because I've been saying to a lot of folks that those traditional workloads aren't going away, and the enterprise that has been fueling 2 decades of growth for the industry is still growing and still going to have
Yes.
requirements. And what we've realized is that there's an increasing scarcity of really that flexible product to satisfy the traditional enterprise requirements. And so for us, that's both an opportunity and a challenge, in that we can fill that gap in the marketplace, but we also solve for workloads across the spectrum. So we have today about 100 megawatts of AI workloads in our platform, because we had the opportunity to capture them. But we also have demands from large scale financial, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and whether they're an existing customer or a new customer, they have requirements and they need to grow. And that really our product has become scarce from an availability perspective. So that's really the opportunity that we're focused on.
Yeah, it's when I think about things that have maybe not been focused on as much during this AI era that we're in. I certainly think the enterprise market and that growth for sure. I'd also put even like cloud growth, the cloud market still growing at 15, 20, 30% a year. So much of the focus has been around, large campus sites in different, in maybe secondary or tertiary markets with this large power demand. But there's still maturity happening in the cloud sector. There's still maturity happening for the financial company that is looking for, 500 kW or a 1 megawatt, environment where they can grow over the next, 5 to 10 years. It seems to be still out there. I'm interested from your standpoint, as Flexential has grown. I would say pre-leasing a site is like a blessing and a curse. It's obviously great to lease the whole thing, but just like that, you've got to go find another site. How has that been for? I know you're into some of those discussions around growing the portfolio and the infrastructure challenges that are out there. Obviously, there's the power challenge. What other infrastructure challenges are you experiencing and having to navigate through?
Yeah, so I think as we started building larger scale facilities, so our current largest form factor is 36 megawatts, which we really look at in 4.5 megawatt increments that we can sell either 4.5, 8. We don't necessarily like going higher than 13.5 for any single customer, just because the way we finance the business, it's better to have to not have customer concentration at the facility level. But we also, our model is multi-tenancy. So we don't want to fill up. We don't want a facility to be built to suit for one customer. We have
Sure.
a whole range of demand sets that could fill up the environment. But to your point, we've been experiencing, really pre-selling activity for over a year at this juncture. So as we're developing it, we have customers lining up to fill it, and some of those consumer, and I'd say generally the consumer is buying a lot more than they did in the past. And so if you have 3 or 4 customers that line up that could fill the whole facility, that's great, but it's also, to your point, challenging, because then you've got to start developing the next one, and you have a lack of capacity in the interim if it fills up too fast. I think the other dynamic, which we've started to question ourselves now, is do you really want to sell it a year in advance, or do you want to sell it 6 months in advance? Just because pricing is advancing in the right direction for the industry. And so, if you have more tension in the system by waiting 6 months to pre-sell it, do you drive the opportunity for I'll call it more competition for the space, and thus you can drive a better yield as a result.
Yeah. That's a great thing to point out. And maybe for those that are watching that aren't in the industry or don't have the history, if Chris and I were talking 5 to 10 years ago, that pricing tension moving, higher was not the case. It was going the other way because the market was more competitive. There was less demand. Now we're seeing both of those things have shifted quite a bit. And so there is this balance of, probably when to do a deal and how far in advance. Flexential, I think this for sure, that you all put out your state of AI infrastructure as a report that goes over users' understanding of AI, and talk about maybe how you're interacting with the end users and kind of how you're seeing them interface with AI and maybe enterprise users as well as some of your larger customers as well.
Yeah, so I'd say, and don't hold me exactly to these timeframes, but let's say 2 years ago, the availability of GPU infrastructure, really set upon the market, but it really wasn't deployed yet in scale. So we've worked with a lot of the I'll call them the specialized GPU cloud providers, if you will, to enable those environments so they could bring all of these exciting and incredibly powerful AI applications to the world, but really to the enterprise. And so we were involved, fortunately, in the early days of helping set up the scaffolding, if you will, and there's still a fair amount of that being built. But then as those environments have come online, we're really seeing the enterprise start to adopt those applications, whether they're doing it directly themselves, or they're leveraging some of the as a service platforms that seem to be very actively bringing AI capabilities to support whatever the given application is. Give it whether it's Dropbox or Workday, you sort of see an AI button or multiple AI buttons popping up all the time. And so we recently released a state of AI infrastructure report that basically said that 51% of enterprises are actively adopting it and expect to drive an ROI on that in the next year. And that's been the big question around. I think from an investor's perspective is given the scale at which these environments are deploying, what's the ROI model to justify that level of scale? So I think seeing the enterprise have both the desire and the expectation that they're going to be able to drive ROI from whatever AI applications they're deploying in the relative near term, I think will begin to, provide some support, for that narrative, if you will, that there is in fact a lot of return to be generated from deploying these AI applications.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point out, just about the businesses in the enterprise sector, their expectations around AI and the ROI that they expect to get. I think that obviously the bigger companies that are doing these really large projects, focused on that. A lot of their ebb and flow, I'm sure, is around, hey, we made these projections and we believe this is what the industry will do, and they're waiting to kind of see what will take place. How do you think about the talent gap that we've got right now in the industry? I mean, it's really exciting because so much is happening, so much is growing, especially around this high performance infrastructure. But how do you think we work over the years? I mean, I know Flexential's big in that world as far as like educating the market on what's happening and trying to attract talent. But from your standpoint, what are the things the industry needs to do to have people in place to continue the growth?
Yeah, so there clearly is a large skills gap today. I think part of it is really just I'd say the growth in the industry overall. So we had a bit of a we had a skills gap before the onset of AI, and the onset of AI is only excel or further highlighted that. And
Yeah.
so I think really we're putting a lot more focus on training and education, but also I think from the enterprise's perspective, they need to leverage third party providers like ourselves who are actively spending our part that part of it part of our core competency is the skills to enable this type of infrastructure and these types of workloads. And while we clearly have a skills gap as well, the fact that it's part of our core competency just means we can help out an enterprise whose core competency has nothing to do with it, if you will. So so I think it's really just increased energy to kind of bring the skills up to par, but also have them move at the pace that the industry is moving in now. Because the skills gap around I call it the skill requirements around AI, what we're seeing on the AI deployment front didn't exist. It didn't exist 2.5 years ago. So this is so new that it's kind of like, okay, well, now we need these skills that we never even thought of before. And so it's just, I think it's an energy game there, meaning not power, but how much we invest in making sure that we're bringing our skills up to the level that they need to, so we can support our enterprise customers as well as we can.
Yeah, the market is moving so fast. I mean, the growth in the last 2 years, 3 years is really it's put our industry in this whole new stratosphere. And I think whether the data center operators is chasing the enterprise group or a hybrid, or the large hyperscale users, it's just everyone is in such a different place than they were 2 to 3 years ago. If I know you don't have a crystal ball, and sometimes we make these predictions and thoughts about the future, and we look back and we go, man, I was wrong. I mean, I think I have many podcasts that are like that. So, but as you think about the next 3 to 5 years around the AI infrastructure, what do you think it looks like? Is there something in the industry that we're not talking enough about yet, that you see coming? Like, what do you think this world looks like infrastructure wise with AI and the enterprise user in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I've started to shy away from really making predictions, if you will,
Sure.
just because
Smart man.
what's happened in the last 2 years is unprecedented based on my 18 years of experience in the industry.
Yeah.
You talked about, for 16 of those 18 years, kind of managed against price compression, and we didn't necessarily have to worry about the underlying. There wasn't much in the way of technology risk, in the data center domain, because a generator is a generator, and and electrical switch infrastructures, and those are intended to live for 20 to 40 years, and so, but obviously, starting 2 years ago, the demand supply equation inverted, and it's really made every primary assumption change.
Yep.
Where I have found myself really questioning business as usual doesn't apply anymore. So
Mm.
it certainly doesn't apply to capacity development, and thus the enterprise customer. I think one of the things that they're appreciating real time is that their capacity planning has to change. So because our capacity planning is becoming longer term in nature, and thus almost by definition theirs has to be, in particular given the amount of demand that we're seeing. And so I think kind of the consumption behavior is has to change over the course of the next 3 years, and that's maybe not answering your question, but I think about what we talked about a bit earlier, is that is there product or is there inventory available to meet the enterprise requirements, and that's a question mark at this juncture. We're working as hard as we can to deliver it. But I think it's going to force the enterprise to have to think 3 years out instead of
Yep.
1 year out in their budget cycle, and we're starting to see that. So I think for those consumers that have active requirements, are appreciating what's going on around them, we're beginning, and their advisors, meaning the broker community, are coaching them that they need to get they need to get in front of planning in order to ensure that they actually have the resource that they're going to
Yeah.
need when they get there. And so I think that's changing. I think with some of the new chip and server infrastructure that's coming on the market, meaning the GPUs, and what's going to come next in terms of Blackwells and so forth like that, the fundamental design of the data center may need to change,
Mm.
in that you have really powerful racks of server infrastructure, but they consume a ton of heat and need a lot of cooling, and they can't be right next to each other, or they'll melt each other. And so how do you think? It used to put whatever it is, thousands of racks in a facility at a certain density level, but are you putting half that? And just given the power requirements of that server infrastructure. So I think that there's some design considerations that we will begin to think about as we move forward. Our latest generation is 50 kW cabinet capable and liquid cooling ready, but and when you blend an AI pod, if you will, maybe it gets to 30 to 40 kW cabinet when you blend the compute. I'm sorry, the GPU infrastructure with the compute with the network. But as the next GPUs get higher in density, that equation is going to need to change as we move forward. So I think there's a whole host of things that we need to be thinking about that make, back to my original point, that make a prediction quite challenging, because
Yep.
I find myself more focused on the trends, so I can adapt, or we can adapt our model towards what's going to be of highest utility to our customers 3 years from now.
Do you, with customers today, do you have do half of them have an appetite for, cabinets that could be liquid cooled? Is it 30%? I mean, how would you, your customers, obviously it's a wide, spectrum of different types of industries, as well as different sizes of customers. But I mean, would you say half of them are focused on that now and half of them are not? Or kind of how would you, can you bucket them like that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't run the actual percentages, but I'd say within our consumer base, liquid cooling is, I'd say, in its infancy. Even for some of
Yeah.
more sophisticated technology companies that you would be expect, or the AI companies that you would expect would be deploying it actively now. And I think some of it has to do with, you know, 2 years ago there weren't environments in scale that can enable it. You know, we're liquid cooling ready, but if you've got to deploy, really quickly, and you've got an air cooled environment that can satisfy the density requirements of that GPU infrastructure, then that's fine. Because these AI, these GPU cloud providers, if you will, they have active contracts that they need to fulfill. So they are deploying in air cooled environments that can handle it. They're likely buying and building their own, so they can build something that is very specific to their optimal design requirements, as they're considering higher density infrastructure. So I think it's it's a mix, if you will.
That's good. Yep. Okay. One last question: as you CEO of Flexential, have been in this industry a long time. This is more just maybe off of the data center industry, but more about leading a company. What is something, as you look back over the last year or two, that you're really proud of related to Flexential or the culture, or getting maybe the company to where it is today versus where it has been? What is something you look back on and go, you're really proud of that thing?
Yeah, I've been saying something for the last year or so that I can't remember who exactly I plagiarized it from, but plagiarism is a form of genius, as they say. So, but I heard somebody say culture always wins, and and Flexential has been on a journey. We've had our ups and downs and our strains in the system, but what we've made sure that we're building along the way was a strong culture, and I'm proud that culture is never done, but I really feel like we've got a strong culture that's helping us climb mountains, if you will, on new challenges that we're going to face. And I say culture always wins. Culture can keep you from keep you from being successful if you've got a bad culture, and it can certainly enhance or accelerate your outcomes if it's strong. And so and I think that will sustain Flexential's success for quite some time, because we've spent so much time building it, and that it's kind of inherent in what we do, and hopefully that won't fade in the future, whether I'm at the helm or somebody else is. And it's because I also think that's one of the hardest things to build. So we build massive data centers with huge infrastructure in them that supports really, really critical applications for banks and hospitals and as a service companies, and but ultimately the hardest thing to build is that intangible, which is culture, which I think will help us win at the end of the day.
Yeah. Really good. Well, Chris, as always, thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time. One thing I appreciate about you is I think you're obviously a very front and center, CEO in the industry, and our industry needs people in your position out there educating and talking about what's happening in the market. It's shifting quite a bit. So always appreciate you coming on and sharing. And for those that are out there, flexential.com is their website. They have sites all across the U.S. Will continue to grow. And I really appreciate you being on. And one of the only, like I said, I think me and you are probably the only two that have ever thrown a rugby ball in a facility. Yes, there we go. I love it.
Couldn't resist. It had to come into the...
I love it. It has to. Well, it's good to see you as always. Thanks for the time.
All right. Thanks, David. Always great to spend time with you.